Hello and welcome to another video from avforums.com. This time we're going to be looking at the picture settings we got when calibrating the review sample of the Sony KD X9305 or X93 for its short title. We're going to be looking at both night and daytime settings for SDR and also some brief settings for high dynamic range content, or HDR if you prefer. So the first thing you need to do is press the action menu, and we're going to be going to doing the critical nighttime calibration first. So this brings up a menu to the left hand side where you select picture, and here this is the mode we use for nighttime calibration. It's the most accurate out of the box, and that's Cinema Pro. Auto picture mode to off, brightness right down to 10. This is an incredibly bright panel, and that will give you an output of about 140 CDM, which is more than ample for nighttime viewing. Colour we knock down to 49. Light sensor off. Then into the advanced settings. You can see that's just a replication of the front screen setting of 10 for the backlight or brightness, and the contrast is max. Now we have to do this to make the 10-point white balance controls work properly, but it causes no clipping, so it does no harm. Camera reduced to -2, which gave us a response for about between 2.35 and 2.4, which is great for nighttime. Black level, which is actually traditionally called the brightness control, is set at the default of 50. Black adjust off. Advanced contrast enhancer off. The auto local dimming we had at medium, which is the default. There's a small bit of blooming and a little bit of backlight pulsing now and again, you see, but it's actually a pretty good system. So medium's a good setting there. Extended dynamic range, there's no need for that, but if you want to have a play with it, it increases perceived contrast a little bit more, but it did cause more black light fluctuations. And then we go into the colour settings. Again, that's a replication of the front screen, which is knocked down 1 to 49. No need for the hue control. Now we use colour temperature expert 1, but you can use expert 2 if you prefer. Just gets a little bit confusing. And now these are our white balance settings, so get your pen and paper and pause button at the ready. It didn't need a lot of manipulation. And now we'll look at the 10-point adjustments. Let's start at 1, which is 10% stim. 2 for 20% stim. 3, 4, as you can see, we've just had to make minor adjustments just to get the grayscale and gamma tracking pretty much ruler flat. And to 6% stim, to 70. You can see they're all quite similar, quite linearly out. We've got 90, and for white, just a little bit tweaking need there. Back out of the colour menu, into the colour menu rather. Colour space we set at auto, and the XD93 does a really good job of detecting the right colour space and switching to it, so you shouldn't need to touch that. Live colour, again, it's off in terms of the purists, but if you want to have a play around with it, it's actually quite an effective processing control that gives you slightly more vivid colours without really harming the image. And then into the clarity settings. Sharpness we knocked back to 25, that was the sweet spot there. Reality creation is manual, that's the default at 20. It makes a really good job of scaling HD and SD content. Mastered in 4K, unless you've got any discs that are mastered in 4K, which are released by Sony, you can leave that off. That would be the vast majority of people. Random noise reduction and digital noise reduction off for high quality sources. Motion, this is an interesting one. We have it off for Blu-rays. You might want to, if you're sensitive to judder on 24p content, the True Cinema setting is quite effective at getting rid of that at its defaults and doesn't cause any soap opera effect, so feel free to stick it on that. But we had it off the majority of the time, so these become defunct and greyed out. The film mode is set at high for proper cadence detection, and we'll just back out, and that completes the nighttime settings. Now we'll quickly go into the daytime settings, which are based on the cinema home mode, which is quite a bit brighter by default, but the settings are quite similar. Brightness is cranked up to 30, and that'll give you a really good high level of brightness in a really bright room. You might want to actually knock that down depending on your environment. Colour we increased to 51 to give it a little bit more saturation. So now we'll delve into the advanced settings. Again, we can see the backlight setting of 30, called brightness here, replicated from the front page. Contrast at maximum. Gamma this time at 0, which gives us a gamma of about 2.0 response, which is good for daytime environment. Black level default 50. Again, auto local dimming at medium. Out into the colour settings. Again, colour 51, hue at 0. Colour temperature, we based it on the same colour temperature settings, which brings through the nighttime ones, but we did a few tweaks. As you can see, we've altered the blue gain and blue bias a little. So it's -1 for red gain, green gain is -3, blue gain maximum defaults, red bias, which is the low end, at -2, green bias at -1, and blue bias at 5. We didn't bother with the 10-point adjustments, there really is no need on a daytime setting. And again, into the cloud settings, and we've got sharpness at 25, no need to change these. Relative creation at manual. Again, mastered in 4K off, unless you've particularly got a disc. Random noise reduction off, digital noise reduction off, and the motion settings exactly as I said for the nighttime. If you'll just excuse us while we switch our generator into HDR mode, we'll look at the HDR mode settings in a second. Okay, brief pause there while we switch the meter into HDR mode, but there's one important thing we must show you if you've got any external input supporting HDR, a Blu-ray player, a media player, or an AV receiver, is you must press the home button on the remote instead of the action menu, which brings you up to the Android TV interface. Scroll right down to the bottom into settings, and just excuse me, my flashes on and off, and we go to external inputs, and then if we go down here we see HDMI signal format. Now we can see you can have it either standard or an enhanced. Now enhanced, as Sony says, it allows the display of high quality HDMI signals, i.e. 4K 60p, 10-bit and 12-bit. So we've got that our 4K Blu-ray player on HDMI 2 and our amp on HDMI 4. So you just make sure that's enabled before you attempt any HDR viewing from an external source. Now we'll go back to our enabled input, or one of our enabled inputs, and we'll choose HDMI 2, that's where the generator is plugged into. And then we bring up the action menu, and again, as we did with the SDR settings, into the picture. As you see, the picture mode is enabled and set at HDR video. That's grayed out as well, auto picture mode. Brightness we are at maximum to get the maximum effects out of HDR. You can play around with that if you find it a little bit too bright, but we found that quite exciting. Into the advanced settings, see brightness, contrast at max again to make the 10-point work correctly. Gamma, or in this case EOTF, which is set at -1 and tracked virtually perfectly on this Sony. Black level default of 50, black adjust off, advanced contrast enhancer off. Auto local dimming is automatically set at medium and unchangeable, and extended dynamic range also at high. No problem with that. Into the colour settings, colour at 50, hue at 0. Now the colour temperature settings transfer from input to input, so if you need different settings for your HDR, which you almost certainly will, then you must choose Expert 2, otherwise you just replicate or wipe over your SDR settings in Expert 1. Advanced colour temperature into our white balance settings now. I'm not a world away from the SDR. Our gain at max, green gain -3, blue gain -1, red bias -2, green bias -1, blue bias +5. Oops. And we're going to the 10-point settings. we go, 10% stim, just little tweaks. Pen and paper ready because I'm going to fly through these right now. 30% stim, 40% stim, 50, 60, as you can see, just the gentlest of adjustments. The white balance is in pretty good shape. Adjusting it. There. And then we go for full white. Just need a little bit more work. And we'll back out of the colour menu, as we can see, colour space. Auto, if you've got any problems with your Blu-ray player switching, which you shouldn't have, you might want to manually select BT 2020, but really should be working properly with auto. If your setup's right, live colour off. Again, you can have a little play around with that, it's quite an exciting control. But for maximum fidelity, leave it at off. Sharpness as per the SDR settings at 25, it created no ringing and no softening, just at the sweet spot. Battery creation again at manual. Everything else off in here. And motion, this is one I personally found that 4K or 22160p or Ultra HD or whatever you want to call it is quite juddery at 24p, which is the default for Blu-rays. So I had this custom setting with smoothness at 3, which got rid of some of the judder without introducing soap opera effect rather, and clearness at minimum, film mode at high to detect cadence detection, for proper cadence detection. And that completes the HDR settings for the Sony KD55XD93. Remember, you can check out more reviews at avforums.com/reviews. You can check out more videos at avforums.com/videos. And why not follow us on Twitter? And you could also like our Facebook page. Thanks for watching.